Love God, love your neighbor. These are the two greatest commandments. Somebody left this comment on my Instagram post of why Frank Turek is wrong about the Sabbath. Pause to read it, it's incredible. You see in Leviticus 19:18, we see where the Bible first says you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But what's interesting is this whole chapter up to this point is a summary of the Ten Commandments. Check this out. In verse 3, we have Commandment 5 and Commandment 4. In verse 4, we have the first two commandments. In verse 11, we have 8 and 9. In verse 12, we have Commandment 3. In verse 13, we have a combination of 7 and 8. In verse 17, we have Commandment 6. And they're all summarized in verse 18, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord, God says. Let's not forget, this is Jesus speaking. Now here in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we find love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. And in Deuteronomy 5, the context leading up to that verse, we have the Ten Commandments. Look here. Check this out. Pause to read this too. And the rest of them. And let's not forget that the Bible was not written with chapter and verse divisions. So Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5 is a summary of the Ten Commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. Now, a lot of Christians will try to get out of obedience to the Ten Commandments by saying that the only two commandments that Jesus gave us is love God and love your neighbor. However, just basic, rudimentary level Bible study shows us that what Jesus is saying here is that love God and love your neighbor is obedience to the Ten Commandments. How so? The first four deal directly with our relationship to God. Love God with all your heart. Commandments 5 through 10 deal directly with our relationships with each other. If I love God, I'm not going to worship other gods. I'm not going to make idols. I'm not going to take his name in vain. I'm going to keep his Sabbath. The true seventh-day Sabbath. If I love each and every one of you, I'm going to honor my parents. I'm going to honor my elders. I'm not going to unalive any of you. I'm not going to commit adultery with any of you. I'm not going to steal from any of you. I'm not going to lie about any of you. I'm not going to covet what any of you have. So if you're one of those who uses this verse as an excuse to reject the Ten Commandments, just remember, Leviticus 19 summarizes the Ten Commandments in love your neighbor as yourself. And Deuteronomy 6 summarizes the Ten Commandments in love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Jesus also says, if you love him, you will keep his commandments. He also says that if we want to be his friend, we will keep his commandments. Love God, love each other.